In the very early stages of the Idaho 4 investigation, they told you, NPD told you, that this was a targeted event, that one person in the house, that's what they suggested, was targeted, and that there wasn't a concern to the campus. This was a targeted event. And I have said for a very long time that I believe that they believed that Kaylee was that target. I'm going to show you an early news report. I went back and I looked at the early reporting from January 2023, where a reporter again reiterates that someone on the top floor, and I would argue that it would be Kaylee, was the actual target, and that Xana and Ethan were an accident. And more importantly, listen to the order of events, because in this telling, they'll tell you that Ethan and Xana died first, and then Kaylee and Maddie were attacked next, because one of them was the real target. The devil is in the details. Let's pay attention to what they said in January of 2023 and how the narrative shifted in mainstream media, and ask ourselves why.
So a lot of information revealed in that affidavit. Tell me exactly what stood out to you.
You know, that affidavit was riveting, it was shocking, and it contained a great deal of information. And I can tell you that we received since that affidavit additional information. And here's what we know. That is on November the 13th, that Bryan Kohberger, a PhD student at the University of Washington, entered the home where the 4 students were sleeping through a back entrance. As he got in the home, he encountered 2 of the students, Ethan and Xana, and he wound up killing those 2 students. He then went.
Okay, now I want to stop right there. Stop right there. The official narrative that really got painted and told over and over again just before they seated the jury in Bryan Kohberger's trial was that Maddie Mogan was Bryan Kohberger's target, that he came there for Maddie. They told you over and over again that Bryan Kohberger must have seen, with no receipts whatsoever, they could never provide the receipts whatsoever, that Bryan Kohberger must have seen Maddie at the Mad Greek restaurant, that somehow, without trying to say the awkwardness, is that they think that Maddie is prettier than all the other girls and that he was obsessed with her beauty and had to have her. But being an incel who can't get laid, he couldn't have her and it drove him nuts. And so he decided he had to kill Maddie. That story in various iterations is what they told you over and over and over again. They also told you on a major Dateline NBC special that aired just before the seating of the jury, the one that Hitler went nuts about and said, who's talking to the media? Somebody's leaking stuff to the media. This stuff hasn't been made public. I want to have someone's ass. That's what Hitler said after that Dateline NBC piece. He was furious because someone leaked something off that Dateline NBC piece. But here was the new narrative that Dateline NBC told you. Dateline NBC said, here's what we believe happened based on our official inside information. They stated over and over again in that Dateline NBC special that they had special, never seen before footage and insider type information. And here's what they believe happened. And they told you on Dateline special and repeated over and over again in mainstream media after that, that Bryan Kohberger came there for Maddie. He went upstairs and he started to kill Maddie. They even suggested that Kaylee was just kind of an afterthought, that she woke up in the commission of killing Maddie and that he killed Kaylee as well. And that Xana heard the fight. They went to elaborate lengths to tell you that Xana was downstairs having food in the kitchen and heard the commotion upstairs, went up the stairs and caught the killer in the middle of committing the act, and that the killer then, surprised by her, may have dropped the knife sheath and chased her down the stairs and silenced her and killed her, and then maybe didn't even see Dylan as he passed by Dylan. Now, that's the official narrative that they told you over and over again. And most people who don't follow the case very well will tell you that that's what happened. Bryan Kohberger was obsessed with Maddie. He came in there for Maddie. He killed Kaylee and Maddie. Xana interrupted them. He chased Xana down the stairs and killed them. This reporter is telling you that the earliest statements that they heard from the police department was, it was a targeted event. And what he's going to tell you, listen carefully. He's going to tell you the real target was upstairs. The real target was upstairs. Now that part Dateline NBC might agree with. It was Maddie. However, what he's going to tell you is the order of events. The first person killed, the first people killed was Xana and Ethan. That's something that they have shifted from. Now they're saying, no, Kaylee and Maddie were killed first, and that Xana interrupted and he chased her down. It was kind of like an afterthought. This will say that he came into the house probably for someone upstairs and got interrupted by Kaylee and Xana. That's that reporter's belief. Another way of looking at it is the killer came in to kill someone on the second floor, Xana or Ethan, and then because that wasn't the only target in the house, they went upstairs to finish the other target in the house. And again, the allegation is why certain people lived was they weren't the targets. The people who lived weren't the targets. The people who died were the targets. Now, one could argue, hear me out, that only one person in the bedroom on the second floor was the real target, and only one person was the real target on the third floor, but because they happened to be with someone, Xana was with Ethan that night, and Kaylee was with Maddie that night. If those were the targets, for example, the other people in those rooms may have been killed simply because they were there in proximity to the real target. But again, what I want you to focus on, this reporter says on no uncertain terms that Ethan and Xana were killed first, and then the others were killed afterwards. Interesting how that shifted, and we were told that it happened in the opposite order. To this day, I maintain, they know damn well. They have to. They know damn well what order the victims were killed in, because cross-contamination. If one killer did it, blood from the third floor would, after they killed that killer, would be tracked down the stairs as he chased Xana and would be transferred into that crime scene with Xana and Ethan. Blood from Kaylee and Maddie would be in the bedroom with Xana and Ethan if the killer killed people up there brutally with a knife and then used the same knife to come down to the next floor. There's no way you don't transfer blood from those two scenes. And so therefore they would know forensically which order they were killed in. If it happened the other way around, same kind of scenario. If Ethan and Xana were killed first, their blood will end up on the third floor because the killer would track blood up there. There's no way around it. One killer cannot avoid tracking blood from one scene to the other. So there's no question in my mind that law enforcement and those involved in this crime know exactly what order they were killed in. And yet, this early statement will tell you Xana and Ethan were killed first, and then the girls upstairs were killed next. When did it shift? When did that lie happen? And then you're going to hear another bombshell in here. You're going to hear that more than likely the target was upstairs. I would concur. In my original statement, I told you Kaylee Gonzalez was the target. I believe law enforcement believed that Kaylee Gonzalez was the target. They believed so because of the viciousness of the wounds that Kaylee Gonzalez received to the face in particular. Others were stabbed all over their body. Kaylee was stabbed over and over and over again in the face. It suggests a personal attack. Somebody had it out for Kaylee specifically and wanted to disfigure her horribly and attacked her face over and over again. That indicates somebody who has a personal relationship with Kaylee and wanted Kaylee dead. So in my scenario, I've always said that I thought that Kaylee was the main target of the house. I think law enforcement believed that Kaylee was the main target of the house. And this reporter, without saying it in perfect words, is to say one of the two girls, Kaylee or Maddie, was the target of the house. Everything else was collateral damage. Now, there's other scenarios in which Xana and Maddie could have been. So while I say I always believed that law enforcement thought Kaylee was the target, and I always thought myself that Kaylee was the target, and that other people may have been collateral damage, and I even have a reason why her friends, her close friend circle, if Kaylee was the target, her best friend, allegedly, Maddie, could have been killed by extension because the anger is towards Kaylee and her friends, which would include Maddie and Xana. And then by extension, the boyfriend who happens to be staying over there that night with Xana. So that could explain, again, even if it was just Kaylee who was targeted, somebody may have been angry at all her best friends. Or it could have just been collateral damage. I know I'm saying a lot. But the other bombshell that's going to come out that you're going to hear is when the reporter tells you that not only did Dylan see, and he doesn't list her by name, not only did Dylan see the killer and supposedly, again, saw his, I forgot what he called it, not bushy eyebrows, but something to that effect, his big eyebrows. Not only did she see that, but he spoke to her and said something to her. That's something that's changed the narrative. There was never a conversation, supposedly. In fact, we're to believe now that the killer probably didn't see Dylan, and that's why she was alive, because he just walked past her. He was done with his crime and kind of in a blank fog and walked past her, and she doesn't know why he, didn't kill her, kind of thing. But this reporter will say they exchanged words. So let's finish this out, and then I'll finish my thoughts.
Up the stairs where Maddie and Kaylee were sleeping together, and he wound up killing those two students. At that scene of where Maddie and Kaylee was, he left a tan knife sheet as he was leaving. He came down the stairs and he came face to face with one of the students who survived this carnage. She says that she looked at him, he looked at her. She could see that he was dressed in dog clothing with a semi-mask over his face. She could see his eyebrows were burly. He said something to her, and then he left out that back door in which he came.
So again, there you have it. I'll try to get myself blown up a little bit. There you have it. Again, he came down, he killed Ethan and Xana first, very specific, then went upstairs. And according to this reporter, he's going to suggest if Xana and Ethan, or Xana or Ethan, had been the target, because he again says it was a targeted attack. Moscow police said it was a targeted attack. Somebody there was the target. If the target was singularly Xana or Ethan, then this reporter alleges well enough that he would have just left after hitting the target. But instead, he went upstairs, indicating that the target was either upstairs all along, and he just got interrupted by Xana when he walked in the back door because she was eating lunch or putting food back from her DoorDash delivery. Again, that food was on the counter, indicating that Xana was in the kitchen. So when the killer came in, did he get interrupted on his way for the real target, which was upstairs? That's the argument that I mostly support on this channel. I entertain all theories on this channel, but the one that I entertain mostly is that Kaylee was the target. And I know that a lot of you think I'm completely off, but we have to make our bed somewhere, and that's the one I'm going to say. Kaylee was the target. The killer came in for the target. If he got interrupted or surprised by Xana in the kitchen, maybe he did kill Xana and Ethan. Maybe he did chase her to the room and kill Xana and Ethan because he had to, because there was witnesses. And then he continued up the stairs to kill the real target, which may have been Kaylee or Maddie, and I would indicate Kaylee. I think law enforcement thought it was Kaylee from the very beginning as well. But then the shocker is when he came back down the stairs, he says something to Dylan, according to this reporter. We can put that aside. That may be confusion of what happened, but I just wanted to focus on that a little bit. And let's continue on with one or two other little details, I think.
That is what law enforcement was initially faced with. The student, and for some unknown reason, did not report this incident for about 8 hours. When law enforcement got there, they found this very, very gruesome, bloody crime scene. They started their investigation. What they found through video was that there was a white car, and they specifically described the white car as a Hyundai Elantra automobile. On November the 25th, they put an all-point bulletin out to law enforcement. On November the 29th, a Washington State University police officer notified law enforcement that a vehicle registered to a Bryan Kohberger was at a certain location. And it was at that time that they became laser focused on Bryan Kohberger as a potential suspect in the killing of these 4 University of Idaho students.
Now, what you just heard there is a huge bombshell, and you didn't realize it. And let me make sure that you're clear about it. That reporter just told you that on November 29th, Bryan Kohberger became the focus of this investigation. Why is that huge? Because Payne, Corporal Payne, on the stand, the lead in the investigation, under interrogation or examination or cross-examination, whatever you want to call it, under examination of Ann Taylor, said, when did you become aware of Bryan Kohberger? He said the first time they heard Bryan Kohberger's name was December 19th. That was the first time they'd heard Bryan Kohberger's name. Ann Taylor asked him over and over again. So before the 19th of December, you didn't know Bryan Kohberger? No, we did not. Here you hear this reporter telling you, November 29th, they were laser focused on Bryan Kohberger, and they knew Bryan Kohberger was the lead suspect. Now, why does it make a difference to you? Who cares? Yeah, they knew it was Bryan Kohberger a long time ago. No. Again, Payne said under oath that they had never heard the name Bryan Kohberger as related to this case until December 19th. 19th. Why is that a big deal? Because documents come out that show that Bryan Kohberger's name was on one of the reports as a suspect on December 5th. Again, well before Payne said they'd even heard of Bryan Kohberger, December 5th. And that would be in line with this reporter who says November 29th, they knew it was Bryan Kohberger, or they suspected it was Bryan Kohberger. So on November 29th, they thought it was Bryan Kohberger. On the 5th, there's a document that shows Bryan Kohberger's name on the suspect list. And yet, under oath, Payne tells you that they didn't know it was Kohberger or have any idea it was Kohberger until December 19th. Why are you not paying attention to that? It is a huge problem. Some of you think it's a no, never mind. Okay, so they knew about Koberger a lot sooner than the 19th. Why did that officer lie about when they knew about Bryan Kohberger? There's a real reason you need to pay attention to. We're going to be laying it out over and over again until you start to understand. It's a major, major problem for them to say under oath, we didn't know who Bryan Kohberger was until the FBI gave us the name Bryan Kohberger on December 19th. And yet, again, this reporter says they knew it was Bryan Kohberger and they were laser focused on him since the 29th of November. And his name shows up as a suspect on Idaho State Police documents that have been recently released, one time by accident, showing Bryan Kohberger's name was on the document on December 5th, when they told you they didn't know about him until December 19th, which leads to Ann Taylor saying, you knew who you wanted for this crime, and you then placed the evidence at the crime, basically planted evidence, because you knew who you wanted. See, they try to make you believe that it happened in reverse, that they discovered the DNA evidence and then they knew it was Bryan Kohberger or something to that effect, when in reality it was they knew who they wanted for it, and then they developed the DNA to match the suspect they wanted at the crime scene. That is the part that you need to understand. They lied to you about when they suspected Kohberger, and they suspected Koberger a lot sooner, but they couldn't place him in the house. And some machinations happened in which they were able to place a single source piece of DNA so small you can't see it with a human eye at the crime scene, and then say, there's the definitive proof Bryan Kohberger was at the crime scene. We already know he was there, but we can't put him in the house, so we'll put him in there with a speck of DNA, the size so small that you can't see it with the human eye. And that's what they were going to try to use to say Bryan Kohberger was there. They already had their guy. They already knew who they wanted for the crime. That doesn't mean that he was the one that committed the crime. That's who they wanted for the crime from very, very early on. Let's continue.
They did a cell phone search, and they were able to show that Bryan Kohberger's cell phone pinged at least 12 times in the area where these students were killed.
So one thing that you mentioned, of course, was the cell phone that did ping in that area about 12 times. What does that indicate? Does it sound like maybe he was stalking one or all of these victims, or just that he was in Moscow in general?
No, it sounds like he was laser focused on the house with these 4 victims.
Let's set aside for a minute how ridiculously stupid that comment was. Again, the cell tower services residences all over Moscow, all over. All they've ever said, if America would pay attention and open their ears, was that Bryan Kohberger's cell phone pinged off the cell tower that services the house at 1122 King Road residence. It is not, as this reporter says, evidence that he was laser focused on that house. In fact, Bill Thompson got up in court and said that there's no evidence that Koberger was stalking the house. We don't know how he picked the house. We don't know. We can't even place him in the house. All we can do is place him near the house because his cell phone pings off the cell tower that services the house. And yet, according to this reporter, he was laser focused on the house. Anyways, let's go back to watching fiction. Hold on.
It could be considered tantamount to stalking, but when we
again, this reporter is going to tell you that it's tantamount to stalking because his cell phone pinged off the cell tower that services the house at 112 King Road. Therefore, Koberger is stalking the girls. I would challenge you to find out how many cell phones in that area pinged off the cell tower that services the house at 112 King Road, and ask how many stalkers are there of the girls. Think about that. How many cell phones in the area pinged off the cell tower that services the house at 112 King Road residence? Can you find any person in Moscow, Idaho that pinged off the cell tower that services the house at 112 King Road residence more than 12 times? And if that's the case, were they the real stalker? How many people are stalking the girls if the stalking is pinging off the cell tower? Anyways.
Look at the fact that the Moscow Police Department has put out that one or more of the victims in this house was targeted. It is my belief.
And again, this reporter, the reporter is reminding you, Moscow Police Department said one or more of the victims in the house were targeted. That's why they told you, don't worry, all you students, it's okay to go back to school. There's nothing to worry about because this was a targeted, isolated event. This was mentioned before they knew Bryan Kohberger and who he was. They just knew that the killer came there for somebody specifically. Reasons why, I believe, is based on the victim patterns. When they saw that one victim in particular had received the most vicious wounds, they knew that it was a crime of passion. That's my opinion. Or the other opinion is, if you believe it was a drug hit, they knew who was targeted. They knew who was going to be killed in that drug hit, and they knew what family members or what children were in the house. That's another scenario. But in my scenario, MPD believed, based on the wounds, that they knew it was a crime of passion against a very specific person. They knew who the target was, and that's why they said it's a targeted event. Either way, they lied to the public saying nothing to worry about because supposedly at this point, they didn't know really what happened. They just guessed that it was a targeted event. All right, let's continue on and finish this out.
That once Bryan Kohberger entered on that second floor, and once he killed Xana and Ethan, if they were the targets, he would have then left. But he didn't leave. He went up to the third floor. So it's more likely than not that one of the girls on the third floor, either Madison or Kaylee, was in fact Bryan Kohberger's target.
Now let's stop. Let's stop for a minute and analyze what he just said, because it's worth considering. If it's true that Ethan and Xana were killed first, as this reporter is claiming, he has information that that's what happened. He saw the affidavit, but he was also given additional information. And here's what happened. Koberger encountered Xana and killed Ethan and Xana first, then went up the stairs. This reporter will tell you it was a targeted hit. And if it was a targeted hit and he went up the stairs after killing Ethan and Xana, that makes this reporter conclude that the target wasn't Ethan or Xana. Because if the target was Ethan or Xana, he wouldn't continue up the stairs. His mission would be done. He killed who he came there to kill, and he would just leave. But the fact that he went upstairs means, to this reporter, Ethan and Xana were not part of the equation. They weren't the real target. Whoever the real target was upstairs. And again, mainstream media at some point decided, as this reporter would say, a jury wants to hear motive. They want to know why. And so mainstream media had to put together a story. They put a story together for us. Well, it has to be one of the girls upstairs that was the real target. So we're going to say Bryan Kohberger was going after Maddie because he was a vegan and there was a vegan restaurant in town that one of the girls worked at. So therefore, with no receipts whatsoever, Bryan Kohberger must have seen this girl at the vegan restaurant, become obsessed with her. That's Maddie. He came there to kill Maddie, and everything else is collateral damage. And again, keep in mind the oddity of the whole thing, because Dateline NBC told you that what we believe now, based on inside information, is that the order of the killing was Bryan Kohberger went upstairs and killed Maddie and Kaylee first, got interrupted by Kaylee in the commotion of being interrupted, dropped the knife sheath by accident, chased her down the stairs, and killed Xana and Ethan as kind of an afterthought. And then sat down for a moment, perhaps exhausted, and then left the building. That made Judge Hitler, irate because he said, somebody's leaking information to the press. Where did that come from? Who leaked it? Now, we don't know for sure what Hitler was upset about, but something in that Dateline NBC episode aired to the public is actually what happened, to the point that Hitler was pissed because it was never made known to the public what exactly happened. And Hitler was pissed that they listed what happened. So was it the knowledge that the target was upstairs? Kaylee or Maddie, and they didn't want people to know about that? What exactly made Hitler so pissed? There's many things you can speculate. But the point being is that I still maintain it's super interesting that this reporter states very clearly the order of death. Xana and Ethan are killed first. Maddie and Kaylee are killed second or afterwards. And yet, at the very end, before the trial, they told you it was the other way around. Koberger came in for Maddie, killed Maddie and Kaylee, and then got interrupted by Xana and chased her down. Now, again, and I don't remember because I've done this recording a couple times because I'm trying to get it right and try to sum it up. I don't remember if I told you this whole tirade, but there's no way in hell. I'll just be kind of brief in case I've already done it earlier. No way in hell that blood from one of those rooms doesn't get tracked down to the other room. If the killing started on the third floor, blood from that crime scene will be down on the second floor if they were killed next. If it happened the other way, like this reporter said, and Xana and Ethan were killed first, blood from that crime scene will end up in the crime scene upstairs. So they know for sure what order the deaths were done in. So why is it that we still in America are not certain of what order the killings were done in? And does it matter? Yes, it does matter because it indicates who was the target. Now, so just follow the logic. Again, in my thinking, I still believe that Kaylee Gonzalez was the target based on the personal wounds that she received, the vicious attack to her face, which was different than all the other. Her wounds were, according to Steve Gonzalez, different from the others. Her points of impact were different from the others. It was different for Kaylee than everyone else. Whoever came there may have come for one person, and that was Kaylee. And it is possible that he was attacking Kaylee or came there for Kaylee and then got interrupted by Xana and killed them. But this reporter thinks it happened a little differently. And it's super interesting that report was out there in the wind, that they knew it was a targeted hit and it wasn't Ethan and Xana. That was just they got interrupted, and then the killer then continued to go after their real target, which was upstairs, Maddie or Kaylee. All right, let's finish this out.
Or we may very well never know the motive in this case. In light of the fact that when this case is presented to a jury, that is certainly something that a jury would want to know. Law enforcement, if they know the motive, they've not shared that with the public yet. But I have a feeling that law enforcement, if they believe that that there was a targeted individual in that home, that they clearly believe that they know the motive, and at the right and appropriate time will release that information.
That part, my friends, I do believe. That part I do believe. He states MPD has always said that they thought it was targeted. He believes that they do know the motive. They know the motive. And that at the right time, they'll tell us the motive. They never have told us the motive. Something's being hidden in the case. I've maintained this from the very beginning. They do know what happened. This is why I keep saying, I've been saying it more and more lately, you don't ask questions you already know the answer to. The reason why they didn't ask a lot of follow-up questions that would be obvious questions to ask about a lot of people who are interviewed in this case is because they already know what happened. They already know the motive, and they already know what happened. And like this reporter, I think they already know what happened, and they'll eventually tell us. They never did tell you. They made up a story. Actually, mainstream media made up the story for us that Bryan Kohberger must have seen Maddie and thought she was so beautiful that he had to have her, and he couldn't get laid, so he had to kill her because that's the only choice he had, right? Because he's an incel, and he can't get any. And she was so beautiful, he had to have her. That's the story that they sold you because, as this reporter said, a jury wants to have a motive. But again, this reporter also says, I think MPD knows the motive. I agree. I think MPD does know the motive. I think MPD knew the motive for a long time. And for whatever reason, we have to ask ourselves, why are they hiding the motive? Why did they not ask a lot of questions that they already knew the answer to? It's a lot of things to ponder. And I just thought I'd share that with you. Thanks for listening. Give me your thoughts. Do you think this reporter is onto something? Was the real target upstairs? Did Xana and Ethan get attacked only because Xana interrupted the killer when he came in the back door because she was eating DoorDash or whatever the case may be? Was that completely unintended and the real target was upstairs all along? And if it was it Maddie or Kaylee? And I know most of you are going to say Maddie because that's what mainstream media has told you, and a lot of people don't want to think too hard, so they've already told you who the target was. It was Maddie all along. I'm going to say it was Kaylee. What do you think?